I guess I'm going to go ahead and start. Hi, I'm Kaye Spivey, and welcome to my poetry reading. While I was setting up for this, realized I don't have extra copies of my poetry books. I have 2 copies, which is where I have all of my notes. So I should have had like a background set up so that you guys could see them the whole time. That would have been proper advertising, right? But I don't, so I'm going to be reading out of them. But you can find all the information about them in the links down below. Hello, good morning from the Philippines. Wow. Hello. I'm so happy to have you here. Geez, what time is it in the Philippines right now? All right. I'm going to go ahead and start. Like I said, hi, I'm Kaye Spivey. Thank you so much for coming out to my poetry reading this evening. I'm going to be reading from both of my collections, my full-length collection, Fragments, which published in 2017, and my chapbook, An Isolated Storm, which was originally published in 2015. And then this version came out in 2016. Geez, it's 9 a.m. there? Good morning. All right. So a lot of the poems in especially Fragments are pretty political. Fragments especially, a lot of it was written 2016, 2017. So obviously in the United States, which is where I'm from, a lot was happening. I had a lot of strong feelings. So a lot of the poems are really political. I tried to kind of disperse them, and hopefully this first poem is going to kind of set the tone, I think. So this first poem is called Close Only Counts. I don't know how to stop violence forever, but I wish I could hold compassion like a grenade, pull the pin, and release it when the conversation turns to cost of industry instead of cost of lives. I wish every piece of shrapnel made people stop, listen, and see the world that exists outside themselves. I wish all guns fired only love, like Cupid's bow, and no more lives were lost to lead, blind rage, or terror. I wish that facts were never obscured by personal opinion, that united were a word that held us all together, compassion locked within our fists and in our mouths, that we couldn't escape one another by closing our minds like doors. I wish we could lock arms and halt waves, then turn around and fill lives by taking hands and helping others. I wish that if I pulled the pin of my grenade, the result would be a country mobilized in love, and there'd be no more talk of destruction, no more news of hate. I don't know if anyone remembers when the Las Vegas shooting happened. That poem was a response piece to that event. So give you a tone for how the poetry is going to go. Oh, thank you. The next one is kind of along the same lines. I was writing a bunch of poems early 2016. I was doing 100 poems in 100 days and having a lot of political feelings then for obvious reasons. This is called Creating Villains. I am making an enemy of the wind as it howls, but people have long since locked themselves indoors to be free of it. I am making an enemy of cobwebs trapped in the corners of my house, and stubborn, they reappear with changing seasons. I am watching seasons pass like rainstorms, one moment to the next, and I am indoors locking memories away in dusty cupboards, venturing to toss out the trash between storms. I am making an enemy of the wind, which strives to prevent me. The gusts run through this neighborhood and threaten the trees, pick up the garbage, but didn't make it to the bin, and lift it up, taunt me with it. The wind plays paper like a puppeteer, and never leaving it close enough to catch, I watch the wind blow through another season. Oh, you finally read my Isolated Storm. Thank you. Oh, thank you so much. Okay. This third poem is called One Version of Escape. This is a newer poem that went into this collection. One Version of Escape. If I ran away tonight to somewhere far and distant, where on this earth has the human vice grip not yet tightened? Where is far enough that imagination can go and not be hunted? Somewhere, sand slips through fingers, bodies slip through lakes and chain link fences, somewhere for meeting old stars who hide their faces from the modern world and don't compete with streetlights. How far and with what vessel should I go? Cries of stay, stay, stay match the sound of boots hitting the ground. The haunted trudge being dragged back. How far before imagination cannot run? How long before there is no vessel fit to carry me? All right, I'm switching over. I kind of set these up in an order for myself so that I would be able to just keep going. But this poem is actually part of a series of poems. This is the first one, and I wrote it like this. And then the word darling sounds so good in my head. So there's a whole series of darling poems that haven't been put together throughout one collection, but at some point I probably should just combine them all. But this is the first of the darling poems. This is called On a Ship to Nowhere. Disrupt the silence, darling. Do you see where it leads? This vessel only sails through fog, through the darkest nights. A voice like yours, it deserves the light. Eyes like yours crave a sight of day. As long as you don't blind yourself on the glaring sun or grow harsh from the noise of the world, it would be good for you to leave this place. You've always been too sweet to sail on my ship to dark and sheltered days. The silence does nothing for you. The air doesn't suit your needs. Break into light now, darling, because from here the fog invades your vision. The night smothers every prayer. Thank you. Yes, I tried to prepare. Like I said earlier, I was very nervous for this. This is the first time I've done a poetry reading of my own poems. But this next poem is the first. It's not the first. Way back in high school, I also read a poem aloud to people at an event. But this is the first one I went to a poetry reading for this poem when it was while I was in college. This was published in Northwest Boulevard, which was my college's poetry book. So their literary journal that they put out. This one also kind of goes back. There's going to be a series of poems that I wrote kind of end of college age, where a lot of things happened that kind of sort of reshaped the way I see the world, I guess is the way to put it. Like a lot of kind of major changes happened. So a lot of poems kind of harken back to that were written around that time. This poem especially is to do with that, but also to do with when I studied abroad in England, my senior year of college. And this is called Unlimited. It stopped snowing as soon as I got back. It wasn't magic for Christmas. I used up the magic in November when I was belonging, when I was becoming more than a camped out version of an awkward teen with nothing to show for it, whose failures were peeping through a little more strongly. In November, death escaped me, loss escaped me. Friends were something being defined for the first time ever by how easy it was to stand in the rain, by how getting lost was the best adventure, something we might have never seen, tea and trains and cows and green, green, green. English-speaking countries and the unity of a language without barriers, friendship in music, in history, in literature and drinking, learning value again, the weight of a pound in your hand versus sitting out in the cold or walking 9 miles to see nothing. I ate it up too fast, belonging, and the old things are catching me. Shadows, childhood, stagnation. I thought I'd be a poet, and then I read Matthew Dickman. I thought I'd fall in love, but then I didn't. It seems like I can't say I miss you enough. It seems like you can't say I'm sorry enough, and I'm too young for that. And I've got so much more than that. It made sense in November. I knew who I needed to say I love you to, even though I didn't send postcards. It's wait and see again this year. In November, seeing was unlimited. Oh, thank you, Crash. Oh, thank you. I've really liked that poem for a long time, but it also was pretty... It took a long time to be able to read it aloud. It's one of those types of poems, you know. Sometimes they're a little emotional. You have to have the time, but thank you. This next poem is called Seeking, which I've actually done a video on my channel of before. Made it all fancy, stood outside, but this one is called Seeking. I'm searching for a little flicker beneath the edges of the map, looking for a sign of color, something that will mend the gap. Lately dark is growing thick, wild screaming to be fed. Nightly I've begun to wonder if all the madness is in my head. I'm tired for the frightened children, scratch poor desperate to be seen, and for all who deal lives in poison, salting land that once was green. I'm clenched by claws of panic, stealing breath like goblin slaves, dazed and vaguely groping on for a route on which this body's saved. I'm losing hope like flower blossoms, casting seeds to frosted ground. I think if light is where I'm searching, perhaps it isn't willing to be found. I don't write a whole lot of rhyming poems, and I've talked about it on my channel before. You've probably heard that if you watched my videos otherwise, but I tend not to write rhyming poems because the English language just doesn't lend to rhyme well, but sometimes they'll come in rhyme anyway, like the first verse will be rhyming and then you have to carry on with that if it was good from the start. So that's kind of how that poem started. This next poem is probably the fault of Tumblr. I think the original idea of this, because I'm a nerd, the original idea of this had to do with the idea of something small trying to warm the universe. And I think they were talking about refrigerators, but it ended up being cute. So this is called Ways of Speaking. It follows the rules of convention that a light, blinking alone in the dark, can only be answered by another light or darkness. A faintly beating heart can be heard in both silence or proximity. The soft beat wavers as the candle shrinks from the effort of trying to warm the universe. They call each other in their language of unlike senses. And they are both met with darkness and gasp to keep their small corners of the universe alight. All right. How's everyone doing tonight? Thank you for whoever did the little like. I appreciate it. So this next poem actually comes from after college, when I was still dealing with a lot of the things that had happened late college. And I moved back to Colorado, but up into the mountains and lived with my cousin. And there are a whole bunch of poems that were written around that time because I had a lot of free time during that time, which free time really lends well to poetry, you know? I'm sure if anyone's at home, maybe you've noticed, or maybe it's been harder to write poems recently. But this is called A Letter from a Child. And this is, you know, written as an adult, a letter from a child. I lived in a state of other people's dreams and burned myself on the arid vents. I buried into the side of a mountain and sought refuge where clouds are infinite. Do most people fall apart at 23 and make plans for 25, which will come just as quickly as tomorrow and smell of ground coffee never aerated from your clothes? Because these things stay beneath your skin. Once they're there, they're permanent. You choose them while you're young and hope they'll match the you on a shining stage of 57. A you who napped in the wildflowers today and didn't get groceries. A you who stuck around for the snow to come and grew strong shoveling the car out. A you who made plans for 25 and then for 35 and maybe kept them. A you who is maybe successful and maybe alone, but did learn to dance with a boy who asked you to keep writing, who did find a place you call home and maybe is happy. In a world full of people going crazy, I sit inside my eggshell. And tonight, the moon is watching me. This next one is called Catharsis. This poem was written for someone. I'm going to take a quick drink. I couldn't come up with the word drink. A drink of wine. Is anyone else drinking wine this evening? Wine seemed like the right thing to go with a poetry reading. And when the sun is finally coming out, it's been raining all day. So if I get really bright, I set up the lighting because it was gray outside. So this poem is written for someone, and it's sort of the type of poem where it doesn't matter that whether or not they know it was for them, because it was kind of for me, to get out what I needed to say at the time. Catharsis. If you want to, you can pick up and go at any time, anywhere you want. How many times have I said that? Still, so many chapters wind up trashed in revision. I want to see you. Isn't that a legitimate thought? Isn't crushing you into a sticky sap of mulch a legitimate thought? If I rewrite letters, if I arrange texts and song lyrics, if I lie awake at night and learn Nihongo, if one week I'm in Los Angeles and the next I hit the coast, fleeing for clean air and soft lights, if I'm crying one moment out of fear and the next for sadness and then I'm laughing, we're sharing apple cider out of teacups and the sea breeze is cold somewhere next year. If what we amount to is the number of cats we save from heat stroke and strangers, if almond milk is the glue for lives torn apart, if you can remove yourself from one moment and land casually in the next as though nothing ever happened, lose 6 rounds to the treadmill and 1 staring at the bathroom ceiling, listening to music you can't translate, if you miss every shifting rhythm, every mistake, every subtle glance because maybe no one cares, if you wanted, you could be anywhere by tomorrow. If you wanted, I'd go with you. We could leave by yesterday, get there before this morning, before last night, before 3 years passed and the house got too heavy to live in, too full to leave. Okay. You're too young for one. Oh my gosh, how old are you? Oh, thank you so much. Water. I've also got water here because I wasn't sure if the wine was going to do it, if I was going to be talking this whole time. So I'm with you on the water. This next poem is along the same lines in my train of thought, but I'm sure it sounds like a very different poem. It's about the same things said in a different way. This is called Buttercups. Remember the field of buttercups, or what we thought was buttercup, laced between watchtowers of thistle? Slow our footsteps, calm our breath. We're standing in the afternoon sun. You know better than anyone how time makes us change. Now that I'm gone, you see that the thistle's been cut down by tractors and by the blades of too many feet. You know better than I do that once you learn a flower's name, it loses its meaning. Just like when you learn to care about something, someone, they leave you. More and more I doubt I've ever seen a buttercup. It could have just been thistle and prairie grass, and we were too close to the ground to remember. We were standing in the sunlight. Our feet were bare and running, and back then it didn't matter. We were running through buttercups. That soft dirt, those cageless skies. We might still be running. Oh, 17. Oh, happy birthday. I'm going to be 30 next month. Oh. Happy early birthday, I should say. July is, I guess, a ways off, but with the way the year's going, it's going by quickly, so we'll both be older soon. This next poem is one that actually was nominated for Best of the Net Award by Alternating Current, who published it. This one is just a memory. I'll go ahead and read it. This is called Hurting Autumn. I know these things don't need to be true. Fences of blackberry bushes and sticky apple pulp, sugar wafting from the window, the sunset sky, bare feet on sharp prairie grass, letting the dogs out for a run down the field before it gets too dark over foothills. The last day of the year for short sleeves, peach slivers drying overnight in the backyard, and rabbits scratching in their hutches. Mom rolling out cinnamon bread, the neighbor dogs barking across the way, and geese calling overhead on their way to the lake. As we run, the dirt is warm and dry under our feet. Sorry, that was Zuko. As we run, the dirt is warm and dry under our feet, where the sun and baseball cleats stirred it. The stars would be coming out and all have names that Mom would know. Cassiopeia on her throne, Orion fending off Taurus the bull with his shield. Cold air is the promise of school starting up again. And the wild pigtails down my back shaking out. I bring the dogs back in and shut the gate, closing in long nights that could have been any day. All right. And this is also another memory. I tried to group them a little bit together so that the poems would flow. So this one, this was also published at one point. And this is about living up in Colorado over the summer in the mountains. This is called Monsoons. The rain changes everything a little bit, redirects the morning. The spitfire breath of 9-hour days lazes off to the lightning and thunder that doesn't scare anyone when it cracks across the whole wide sky and leaves footprints of the storm in the corners of the clouds. A moment for a coffee break. A moment for sometimes we stand around waiting as the warm air rises off the mountains and the clouds sink down, fill in the spaces where the sea used to be. All right. And that's enough memories. Let's get back into some political poems. I'll ease us in. This one is called Change, but not change in like the super political. This was inspired by the Grand Canyon, which is where my dad worked for many years. Pretty much my whole life he worked at Grand Canyon, or he worked for Grand Canyon National Park. So I've been there many times. So this is originally inspired by that. It's called Change. I see rivers in the crowded streets where there is only runoff, and that is not poetry, not on its own. Not words and egos and the false fantasy of seeing something unique and brilliant and disengaged. We are each the runoff, the overflow, the crowds. I see rivers there. Each particle is working together so that 17 million years from now, there will be a canyon. Through our flat structure, layers exposed and breathing, there will be oceans that craters formed, and people will come from across the world to marvel at how a river could do this, as though a river did this in a day or a lifetime, as though any particle of the river, of those streets, 17 million years from now, will be the same as the first raindrops who fell there. Little poem about activism. Right there. I know this one is a poem that I have been told is the funniest poem in An Isolated Storm, my chapbook. This is called A Short Promise to a Beatnik. I saw the best minds of your generation become the best minds of mine, and what do you know? We're obsessed with zombies. I'll see you after the apocalypse, Ginsberg. I'll see you when the soil becomes rain. Well, thank you. Thank you for all the applause. Actually, I was very into Allen Ginsberg for a long time. I was really into the way his poems, the way they impacted people, kind of the extreme movement that grew out of his poetry. Like Howell really affected a lot of people, and I was so interested in that. So I spent a lot of time kind of studying him and reading a lot of his work and watching all the interesting movies about him and finding out some of the odder details of his life. But this is more sort of taking the ideas of Howell and thinking of it in terms of today's society and today's world. And this is called We Take the Silence. I'm not with you. Villains who hold on with nails and sharp-edged sneers, round wakeless eyes burned the map to you, and I threw gas on the flames. Did you know? I could not write with charred hands. I'm not with you in the sense that you are not in Rockland and we are not compatriots. We are not holding fast to the liquid breath of who humanity is in pale, gruesome flesh. We watch the dust fly off the page and we are always victims. My generation, all choking to be heard, villainized, absorbed, dramatic. I'm not with you. Inasmuch as we cannot romanticize the grit now that we see it plainly. If everything catches once the flame is lit, we must cast our eyes to the stars or blink in the smoke, and I'm not with you. I sit removed and observing. My lines are mine, but that essence has been written, and I'm sending back extrapolations, watching privilege take the prizes and the generation of bright lights and colors get washed, scrubbed, demoralized. I've gotten great at sitting back and nursing scabs, and I'm not with you. You don't have to forgive me. Coming down to some of the last poems here that I've prepared for this evening. Thank you guys so much for coming out. It's already gone on longer than I thought it was going to. I'm glad that people have come to the poetry reading tonight. I have 3 more poems to read for you. This one is called Eyes. You could be my muse, the magic of the night, shifting away into stars and dim-lit places even strays don't venture. Cold lattes spilled on sidewalks, long dried up into an image you'll find in a museum someday, if that artist ever finds a stage. And if the music's amped out into the night, who knows what kind of story that will be? Something you'd stay up for just to trip that moment on repeat. Red lines and a clean verse. Stars fill up my vision and sink into the lights. All right, these 2 poems are on facing pages, which makes it really nice and easy for me. This first one I'm going to be reading is from a dream I had, a really vivid dream where this just tree was growing, a huge tree growing in the middle of a city, and I was on a train track, and like down below, I could see my cousin standing there by the tree, like her hair wrapped up in a towel. I don't know what that was about, but they were flying hot air balloons up into the branches of the tree, and I've never been able to like capture it quite how it happened. And like nothing is ever vivid enough. Like I wish somebody could just paint that for me. It was so incredible. And so this was kind of remembering that and kind of taking it kind of towards a solar punk angle. This is Urban Dreamscape. Wish that skyscrapers were redwoods, that a tree took up the skyline, a whole city block would be tangled roots breaking out of concrete. When you're on the train crossing the steel bridge over gray city blocks, you would see it rising up over buildings, brushing the clouds. We could fly hot air balloons into its branches, the fires that lift us floating like a mist of fireflies in the haze, and we'd park like inverted ornaments on reaching branches. We'd grow more trees, bursting through the pavement, interrupting the standard traffic whir and the cold dust of ignition. We'd build airships. From the tops of the trees, we'd reach for the stars. Okay. This is going to be the last poem of the evening. Oh, Ooh, Edgar Allan Poe was definitely an early influence for me also. He was one of my favorites. I had the Raven I don't have the whole thing memorized anymore, but I had the Raven memorized. I still have El Dorado is one of his more obscure poems. I have that one memorized. I love Dickinson. Sylvia Plath I actually got into a much later in life. I sort of like avoided her at like the age when normally people get into her, which is usually high school. And then I finally read The Bell Jar not that long ago, and I was like, there's a reason she's so well known. She has quite a way with words. Her descriptions are so vivid. Let's see, who else influenced my work? Recently, Matthew Dickman, really. I have the poetry book over here. Matthew Dickman was a big influence on me for a lot of my college age poems. He kind of opened up the idea of writing a little bit funnier poems. Also, Billy Collins, when I was first learning about poetry, Billy Collins was one that he makes poetry so accessible. You see it in a different way than a lot of other poets. Who else would be a really good, some of my influences? I'll think on it. But yeah, definitely. Oh, definitely Edgar Allan Poe. Easily Edgar Allan Poe. What else? The Jabberwocky I've had memorized since I was young. Way back in the day, we used to have to like memorize a poem and then recite it at school for like an event. And the Jabberwocky, my older brother memorized, and thus the whole family memorized it and can recite it all to this day. Yep. I can't write quite that funny. The Jabberwocky is incredible. All right, I'm going to read the last poem for this evening, and then if you guys have any other questions, I'll go ahead and answer what I can and wrap up this evening. But thank you to everyone for coming out. This last poem is called Possibility. Step up on the tightrope with me. There are ways to keep our balance, hold stiff against the wind. Suspended, we are barely bodies on a string of our own making. The night air drifts across the wire, and we are tiny and infinite. Under lights that have bloomed for centuries, we contain the power to keep steady on a thin line. To battle the obvious fate and reach across, we are a multitude of possibility. Step out with me. Keep the balance in your core and flex your spine. The stars have since cast light on wanderers whose feats were more impossible than ours. Brace with me against the cool wind. Hold my hands. Step. And that is the last poem. Here. Now that I'm done, I'll just put them up here. And if you have any interest in checking out my poetry books, the links are in the description down below. But thank you so much for coming out here tonight. I really appreciate that at least 5 of you came and stayed for the whole thing. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun. I had sort of been thinking I wanted to do a poetry reading. I've been wanting to for a long time. I'm like really nervous. I didn't know how to set it up. And obviously couldn't possibly do one right now with how things are. And as I was thinking about it, I was like, why not set it up as a live stream? Then it'd be something for us all to do this evening. So thank you so much for coming out. If no one has any questions, then this has been a really nice reading, and thank you, and hope to see you again sometimes. Oh, you've started reading Fragments. Thank you so much. Aw. Fragments has a lot more kind of narrative style poems. There are a lot of kind of stories throughout. I didn't read any of the ones tonight because some of them, like, I actually had to take out. I enjoy writing poems as though they're like little fairy tales. So there are a lot of those kinds of ones where there is a narrative that usually is secretly inspired by anime. But thank you. I'm glad you're reading it. I guess I'm gonna say goodnight here, and again, thank you so much, and yeah, maybe we'll do this again sometime. This was great. Oh, Yes. Okay, Crashes, it says, there's one of your poems I read today that I was trying to figure out the meaning of. I can't remember the name of it, but I think it mentioned Cinderella, and the repetition stuck out. Yes. That poem, that was another poem. I almost read it tonight, and then I decided it's called Decisions. It's from An Isolated Storm. This was a working out things in my head kind of poem is where it came from. The she in this, in my head, is someone specific, but it was working through a frustration and an event that was kind of specific, but I loved the way the repetition sounded. I loved some of the lines in it. Like, I really loved, where is it? Let's see. When the waves roll in, the ocean is like diamonds, the way they glitter from afar, the way I catch my breath when the wind shifts, close my eyes. And this one has the repeated line of, she stuck her hand through the fiberglass, which of course fiberglass is very hard. Can't stick your hand through fiberglass, but it's like punching through something that's so difficult, doing something that's so difficult. And that's kind of where that idea came from, like overcoming something. To be vague about it, sorry. But yeah, oh yes, question. How does someone write a good non-rhyming poem? So a lot of it is going to take practice and reading other poems, which is sort of where I started. I read a lot of poetry, but the main thing is taking the idea, and you want to come at it the same way you would prose, but realize that the words mean more. You're going to do more with less. If you write flash fiction, possibly, if that's a possibility, it's more like that. But you're not relying on the rhyme to tell you what the next word is. You're relying on the lyricism, and you're relying on the structure, the story of the poem. So what you want it to sound like is very important. For example, in like song lyrics, there is often a rhyme scheme, but in songs where there isn't, there's still kind of a pattern. There's still kind of a metric that goes with it. There's a way it sounds nice in your head. There's a way certain words sound nice with other words. And you kind of get more and more used to how those words sound nice to you. And you're going to plan on emphasizing words. So the most important word is going to be at the end of the line. And it doesn't have to rhyme or connect with the word at the end of the next line, but needs to flow kind of sentence structure. And the word at the beginning of at the end of the next line also needs to hold a lot of weight. The thing with poetry is when you're reading through, especially when you're reading through and you're not hearing someone say it, the last word, because you have to loop your eyes down, hangs with you as you go down to the next one. So kind of focus on last words. And actually, if you ever try writing a sestina, which the first time I ever did a poetry reading, actually, that was for a sestina that I had written because people thought I'd done a good job. But sestinas are all about the last word in the line, and then it repeats in a specific pattern. But just keep track of the last words. That's really, it's more important than the rhyme that the last word holds weight, if that makes sense, if that is helpful at all. Well, thank you very much. A lot of times with assonance or consonants or alliteration, less is more, and using a mix of alliteration and assonance is better. It sounds better. If there are a lot of S starting words, it doesn't always sound good to be like s. But if there's like S starting words and a few S's inside, sometimes it sounds really nice. You do want to read things aloud if you're using alliteration or assonance, because you don't want it to sound like you're hissing or like you're babbling. But a lot of times it happens on accident, and I love it. You're welcome. Yeah, a lot of the key to poetry is letting the words work the way they want to work, especially in your first draft. Let them come the way they want to come, and then go through and figure out, because if you're trying to sort of wedge the poem in, there are some people who can do that, and I find it really hard, which is why I find rhyming poetry really hard, is trying to wedge in a meaning to a poem. You hear that it's been wedged in. I feel like it's really hard to get around that unless you get kind of lucky. So the less you try and force the words to have alliteration and just let them have alliteration if they happen to, I think the better it is overall. Don't feel stressed, especially if a poem doesn't have a lot of rhyme or something. If it does have one and that one sounds really good, don't feel too stressed to force it through, but keep in mind that is going to stand out to people. Oh, sure, I would be happy to give your poems a read. Just give me lots of time. If you want to send any poetry my way, just give me lots of time. I mean, I'll try to prioritize it over playing Fire Emblem, but I also have a full-time job, so I'll get to them when I can, and I will give you feedback if I can. But yeah, I'd be happy to. Oh, thank you. I like listening to poetry too. I do love reading poetry. Like, I don't know if it's just me and I'm kind of a book nerd, but I do love reading poetry. I love long poetry. I think is probably why I'm not as big on things like Rupi Kaur, like The Princess Saves Herself in this one, because it doesn't read as well. It sounds nice. I don't know. I like long poems. Like, I have a whole stack of poetry books over here. I like Sarah Kay's No Matter the Wreckage. These were like my inspiration poetry books. I like these really long poems, but obviously it sounds great when she reads it. So yeah. Oh, you do rhyming poetry. Oh, nice. Yeah, I'd love to read it. All right. Okay. I think this stream has probably gone on long enough. If you have any more questions, I'll be happy to answer them in the comments down below, but I'm going to go ahead and sign off and finish my glass of wine and probably have some dinner because it's almost 7 here. But thank you guys so much for the really great questions. Oh, let me see really quick. Oh, it's okay. Thank you guys so much. But I'm gonna go ahead and go. Have a good night. And yeah, I'd be happy to read your poetry. Go ahead and send it to me. You can either DM me on Twitter. At Kaye Spivey at outlook.com is my email. But all right, have a good night. Thank you guys so much.